power of my magic!
And in related news, a local man waits at the Yeshiva Harbor in the Lefurian Archipelago for 3 whole days. And now over to MonadoRudra with the on-scene report.
Thanks, Kay. A woman at the scene told us that she was initially stunned to hear the number of days the offender had been occupying the harbor, but responded to the individual in question with the claim that she doesn't pick on idiots. When approached, the culprit fought against the authorities, screaming incomprehensibly while occasionally claiming to be Zeke von Genbu, chaotic bringer of chaos. You may rest easy, however, since the culprit has been detained for loitering. That's all I have for now. Back to you, Kay.
Thank you, Rudra. Coming up next is the return of the show Dramatis Personae, where we break down what makes certain characters so great. Today's episode is centered around the fan-favorite character Mythra. As always, there will be Ophion-sized spoilers, so if you do not want to be spoiled, then I suggest you go put dozens of hours into one of the greatest JRPGs, and then you can come back and watch. Without further ado, let's dive in. With the greatest stories, it's very likely that a strong, notable protagonist was one of the reasons that narrative was spurred on and made memorable. It's quite reasonable to assume that the main character is the best developed or received by the fanbase. However, that's not always the case. There are plenty of occasions in which the supporting characters or villains steal the show, such as Vegeta from Dragon Ball Z or Akane from 999. Both of these characters serve the role of what is known as the deuteragonist, a term originating from the Greek word deuteragonistes, and an individual that serves as the second most important within the work. Greek playwright Aeschylus wanted to innovate tragic performances by introducing a second character in order to generate engaging dialogue and increase character interactions. Due to their importance within a particular narrative, these deuteragonists can commonly outshine their counterparts and become the icon for a given work. This notion is particularly noticeable in Xenoblade Chronicles 2 with Pyra, and more importantly Mythra, the subject of this video. I've said previously that Mythra was a character I wasn't truly convinced by when I had originally completed Xenoblade 2. I thought she was a good character, but didn't exactly realize what the commotion was surrounding her. That was until I played through Torna the Golden Country, and everything was put into perspective. Although we knew what the outcome of the Aegis War would be, having that visualization and witnessing the full development of Mythra had persuaded me on her character. For those that might not be swayed on Mythra as I once was, the question might remain, what makes Mythra such a beloved character? With this video, I plan to explore the complexities of her main story arc in order to provide a clear reason why Mythra is such a standout among such a stellar cast and a fan favorite. Just as before, the goal of Dramatis Personae is to examine several categories concerning the characters, such as the intermingling of their design and personality, gameplay, their character arc, and specific scenes that define personage or mark an evolution in their development. Discussing both Pyra and Mythra at length would take a moment of eternity, so this video will be primarily focused on Mythra, with Pyra brought into discussion for the purpose of further elaboration and defining characteristics of Mythra. Nevertheless, discussing one of the series' most important and beloved characters is still a pretty grandiose task, which is why I'm joined by Xenoblade character analyst and friend MonadoRudra.
Hi everyone, I'm MonadoRudra, or Rudra for short, and it's great to be here for today's Dramatis Personae. The Xeno series as a whole is practically my thing, which I'm sure would be an understatement if any of you are familiar with me. Mythra is one of my favorite characters that Xeno has ever produced, so of course I'd jump at any chance to talk about what makes her stand out.
The link to his Twitter and analyses will be in the description, so please be sure to check his stuff out. If you like Jin, Malos, and Nia, then you will definitely want to read his analyses. In the interest of illustrating the most coherent analysis of Mythra's character development possible, I believe it would be best to first examine her design and how it complements her personality.
In her base form, Mythra has long blonde hair, golden eyes, and wears a short dress that is ordained with armor plating on her upper arms and hips. Her outfit is comprised of 4 main colors being gold, black, green, and most notably white, which encompasses most of her clothes and serves as the largest divergence from Pyra's design. These colors primarily indicate 2 attributes, the similarities between Pyra and Mythra, as they are 2 personalities inhabiting the same person in their respective elements. The colors are suggestive of the elements each has control over, with Pyra's searing red representing fire and Mythra's bright white symbolizing light. Another notable difference in each of their designs is the varying levels of symmetry. Aside from the wedding garter style leg band, Mythra's design is very symmetrical, with her weapon and the green crosses scattered across her armor being perfectly aligned. In contrast, Pyra has a design with a high emphasis on asymmetry, as seen through the distribution of fire on her blade and the green X's that aren't mirrored. Character designer Marasugu Saito commented on this choice, saying, "We also designed her to evoke a certain sense of incompleteness as a way of reflecting the existence of Pyra's other form, Mythra. That's one reason the glowing areas on her body are not horizontally symmetrical, and why we partially removed the back of her outfit and cloak.
The difficulty comes in interpreting whether this decision was made before the design as a means of conveying this theme, or if Saito just wanted to draw cute anime girls and then spun a narrative around it. Regardless, I believe this is the characteristic that best defines Mythra and Pyra's relationship design-wise, since they share these qualities, yet utilize them in a way that contrasts one another, thus cementing how Pyra was created with Mythra's intention of distancing herself from her perceived status as a result of self-imposed expectations. Following Mythra's introduction in Xenoblade 2, she notes that Pyra is a separate self that she constructed, and the rest of the cast acknowledges how Mythra's power seems to eclipse that of Pyra's. Due to the events of Torna, this distinction shows that Pyra is fashioned as a means of having less power, and everything else that Mythra wishes to be and for the world to see. I'll make sure to elaborate more on how the events of Torna effectively transformed her character, but for now, it's important to simply recognize that the Aegis War created a Mythra consumed by fear. This fear irrevocably results in a deviance that is evident through her base personalities. Mythra is depicted as confident, hot-blooded, and blunt through her various interactions with party members. Pyra serves as the facade that Mythra hides behind and has characteristics that directly oppose Mythra. She's kind, soft-spoken, and self-conscious, all traits that logically would make sense for Mythra to desire in her conceived doppelganger. Further highlighting their psyche is the flavor text on the affinity charts. Notice the wording Pyra has on these skills that hint at a lack of confidence or a desire to not burden somebody with her troubles. I think I can, and is there a way, both emphasize this mentality and serve as a stark contrast to Mythra's text. No match for me, I'm afraid, or come at me as many times as you like, it won't change the outcome. For more evidence of the connected nature between their temperament, look no further than the dreamscape created by Klaus where each character's deeply buried thoughts are laid bare. Mythra and Pyra's outward behaviors are effectively swapped, outlining the origin of their nature.
Even the fact that Pyra exists at all serves as a deeper look into Mythra and vice versa. One of the things that Mythra made Pyra for was to be everything that she isn't, at least according to Torna's cast. Pyra is an expert at cooking in her own firelighter, while Mythra wishes that she could.
Why you want to give it a big attitude? I've got to go back out there and fucking tell him, unfold your fucking arms right now, and don't dare start getting fucking chippy or lippy or fucking bitchy with me.
Mythra struggles to control her immense power and act with safety, and in turn, Pyra is subdued, in control of her comparatively weak abilities. Mythra is haunted at the core of her being by her annihilation of Torna and the murder of many of its inhabitants, so Pyra is built to appear innocent, though weighed down by the same regrets that she was built to take over to begin with. Pyra is what Mythra believes her ideal self should be because of the influence of others. In a way, it's also like she took an influence from Jin and his words to her throughout the expansion.
Unlike other characters like Rex or Tora, Mythra's design doesn't contain details that explicitly provide the player insight into her occupation or personality. Yet it's clever because it relies on the player's prior experiences and established knowledge of Pyra's character and design in the early chapters of the game to come to a coherent conclusion on how she differs. Variables like the rare coloring and conduit-shaped core crystal are already provided by Pyra's chapters, so there isn't any necessary work to be done when she's introduced. With this in mind, I believe it's fair to say that areas like gameplay are one of the biggest sections that help to explain her character.
Starting off with how capable she is in a battle then, Mythra really is, just as in Aegis is described, a force of destruction. Her status as a mandatory blade is one thing, but most of her potential really comes in the form of her affinity rewards. Foresight grants evasions and accuracy boosts up to 50% when maxed out, which can be beneficial against fast or high-level opponents, and it's a very respectable ability in its own right. Yet the most seemingly broken characteristic for unoptimized play comes in the form of the skill Lightspeed Flurry, which recharges an art or special in their entirety when a critical hit is triggered.
Okay, well, that sounds really good, but obviously you can't inflate her crit rate to abuse that reward, right?
Nope! I'm wrong.
Glint has the potential to increase her critical hit rate by 15%, which can also be used along with equipment and a core chip to boast ridiculous numbers. Mythra might not have the best DPS in the game, but these skills make her a threat nonetheless and always a good choice. Much like Dumban, Mythra seems to have a lot of flexibility with an invasion-based offensive build, a crit heal strategy using Arts Heal Ox Cores, a tank build around evasions, the list goes on. With such a wide catalog, it's fun to mix up your styles, and of course gratifying to take it easy and spam a button when you just want to relax. Spin to win, ladies and gentlemen!
All that aside, with critical hits acting as a sporadic, strong mechanic in games, having Mythra's design centralized around that reinforces her core nature as a very aggressive and powerful blade. Her focus on such a mechanic also allows her to relate to her counterpart Pyra, who has skills like Flaming Edge and Blazing End that can increase her critical damage by 50% and 85% respectively, which do indeed stack. Building both of the deuteragonist skills around critical hits is a decision made with awareness of their dynamic as well, for two reasons. I would say that first off, switching between them removes the possibility of polarization since they play around the same core mechanic and the player's equipment build is still effective no matter who it is you're controlling. And second, due to the narrative ties between the two, such as their deep-seated fear, establishing a connection through gameplay allows for yet another subtle link to be forged in the player's mind, solidifying this dynamic further.
Then there's that final Ascended form, which is... well... her idle animation gives off an air of confidence, with one hand on her hip and the other hanging loose, as if she doesn't need to exert 100% effort. A lot of her combat animations hold large impacts and a sense of speed, which fits quite well with her brash, hot-headed attitude. Her quest for power marks almost a lack of refinement to her movement, which is clearly visible in her Vanguard switch animation. Characters like Adam and Aegeon come in with a precise slash, but Mythra's is the jump strike that emphasizes energy. She puts all of her weight into the blade initially, which results in her legs becoming practically perpendicular to the ground before slowing as she transitions to her default pose. This wonderful representation of Mythra's stubborn, aggressive behavior allows the player to learn about her through gameplay rather than purely story. Nevertheless, the story of Xenoblade Chronicles 2 is where Mythra is given her best development, and one of the strongest reasons the Aegis is so widely adored. Although the Aegises do not serve as the protagonist of Xenoblade 2's narrative, her presence is what drives its progression, and is arguably the character with the most development. As you could probably tell, the two people in one thing kinda makes this difficult.
Regardless of who is what, for context we'll be predominantly discussing the timeline of Mythra's character chronologically, and thus providing a look at her growth from the perspective of a player that would have began their journey with Torna. This takes us all the way back 500 years to the events of the Aegis War, where Mythra first appears as Adam Origo's blade, having been given the express purpose of halting the devastating rampage of her counterpart, Malos. That initial debut following the annihilation of a gargoyle introduces and highlights several of her key traits. The cheeky smile as she vaporizes Malos' tool, and the manner in which she takes a few strides towards Jin to strike the initial blow delicately emphasizes her confident and reckless nature.
My favorite detail is what her body language indicates upon seeing Jin and Laura. She initially has her arms crossed, which is followed by her expression loosening into a smug grin as she drops her arms. Arms crossed at the chest can usually symbolize a defensive position, where the individual is creating a barrier of sorts between them and their opposition. Yet Mythra's confidence shines through upon seeing her adversaries, which is represented by the dropping of her arms and change in attitude. The player is told in this brief opening scene what to expect from her character, and hints at the several personality quirks we discussed earlier.
Traits like these are reinforced by the way she reacts to Adam's jolly attitude, but the rest of the information surrounding her that the player should be concerned with is presented by the following campfire. Naturally, with only a year having passed since Mythra's resignation, she possesses a very basic and underdeveloped perspective towards humanity in general, as well as the relationship between them and their blades. Her small exchange with Jin brings this notion to light as Mythra demonstrates an elitist attitude with a declaration of her status as an Aegis, further remarking on how strange it seems to her that any blade would be siding with a human. Without extensive exposure to other blades and humans, she lacks the deeper understanding of the world seen within her in the later stages of Xenoblade 2, and while Mythra in the early stages of the Golden Country may be immature in regards to certain concepts and naive to the relationship between all our two species, she is still learning, and does eventually adapt to their social norms. Demonstrated through her and Adam's various discussions, the influence provided by her driver upon both resonance and further experience together is partially responsible for this adaptation, as is the case for all blades. With Adam serving as a father figure to Mythra, it's only natural and almost inevitable that his guidance and will is, more than anything, what affects her deep down.
Over the course of Torna, Adam's ragtag group of heroes recruits more people, and Mythra continues to learn through social interactions. This is sometimes dictated through other characters. A beautiful example is in Adam's conversation with Laura, where he details the overwhelming responsibility he feels wielding the power of the Aegis. We're shown several times that Mythra has a considerable amount of power when Milton becomes angry that Mythra was using the artifices, and seeing how Adam's face lights up upon seeing Mythra's rage in Torgoth. But I think the fact that these characters acknowledge her potential as well as their concerns makes Mythra's power level feel like the character-defining trait it should be. Adam expressing self-doubt in his abilities perfectly aligns with Mythra's feelings of fear and anxiousness that she conceals and Pyra embodies. Much like how Malos is affected by Amalthus's will, Mythra is certainly a victim of the insecurities that Adam feels, and I think it's incredibly fascinating since this dynamic isn't explored as candidly as a result of Mythra not being an antagonist. Going back to the example of Greek tragedy, the presence of multiple characters allows for development of one to be planted in the perception of another, just as Mythra's nature is explored through Adam.
Taking things a step backwards through time, this form of development through perception for the Aegises actually predates the existence of Allrest itself, and was first seen in how the unified government of Klaus's old world treated the potential of the conduit and its constituents. Shaped by the deteriorating circumstances of their own society, the manner by which they oversaw the development of the Trinity processor's rudimentary AI marks the first instance of a Trinity core, or Aegis, being seen as a weapon made purely for the sake of destruction. Klaus was all too aware of this as a member of Avados, the research facility tasked with raising the processor's AI. It may have even been a significant factor in his desperate attempt to experiment with the conduit's ability to reshape their world, given that the combative modifications shaping the Trinity processor culminated with the machine growing beyond standard human control as it continued to create new tools of war. This point in particular would have been hammered in even further by the fact that those tools of war, the artifices, were built only by the judgment of its three-component cores and nothing else. With the conflict between the Trinity's artifices and the Saviorite rebels escalating further and further in a sort of feedback loop, this is precisely the reason that the Earth in their time was ravaged in a way that would be mirrored tens of thousands of years later with Titans and Allrest.
Mythra takes the reins back in several scenes that wonderfully exhibit her development and the mistakes she makes along the way. Take for example the scene that follows Adam and Laura's practice. Listen to the way Mythra delivers this line and how her body language transitions.
A driver and blade are one in body and soul. That's their very nature. You're not at full strength without him.
The first half of the line feels like something Mythra is reciting as indicated by the slow, almost regurgitated delivery, and glance downwards as if she is recalling and repeating something Adam told her once. It then becomes apparent when both the enunciation and head shift switch to her usual delivery, and the raising of her eyes to meet Bridget's. Her response feels quite genuine, like she is applying her newfound knowledge to understanding the connection between blades and humans. Although she has realized more about the world, she doesn't know everything, which is suggested by Adam responding, "It's not so simple as all that." The culmination of her understanding doesn't come until one of my favorite cutscenes in Torna, Clashing Steel. The group has their first confrontation with Malos, and in a technique that mirrors that of Laura and Jin, Mythra and Adam perform the weapon switch mid-combat to great success. Laura and Jin have been together for years, and have developed a bond not many blades and humans could dream of. So to see the evolution of Mythra and Adam's teamwork to echo that of their experienced comrades is unquestionably hype. And the way that she says, "Surprised? This is what humans and blades can do together," shows almost unwavering assuredness in herself that we haven't exactly seen yet in Torna. This right here is the beginning of Mythra's slight rise that only exists to be preceded by the harshest of downfalls. Upon the doorstep of the final battle, Mythra declares to Malos that nobody here is scared of you, and I think the player believes that following their partial success at the center of the capital. Mythra also has not truly experienced what it means to lose, which serves as a double-edged sword for her confidence and the catalyst to Torna's climax. In the ensuing battle against Malos, Mythra retains her composure, although perhaps a little too brash. Nevertheless, that bravado soon rapidly vanishes, faster than Nia's chances with Rex.
You know, nothing can describe what I think about you right now.
Was that too soon?
After all the work I did to combat that sentiment. Regardless, that inexperience with loss is particularly noticeable when Mythra's words and face are riddled with astonishment at Malos' ability to match her wit with his sneak attack on Ophion, much like myself when met with that sneak attack on Nia. One is even able to catch sight of her eyes beginning to waver frantically following the Artifice's destruction, with Jin being forced to step in to confront Malos since she's frozen in shock. Even as Mythra is strengthened by her experiences with the Torning cast, Malos is built for breaching her defenses, and vice versa. Both have the ability to make the other feel vulnerable, but only one of them is using that to its fullest potential in this specific instance.
Malos exudes confidence and loves every second of confrontation, something Mythra can't keep up with, as evident with the destruction of Oresco. Mythra's mind becoming consumed by thoughts of Milton, and the screams are great ways to detail how she's been pushed over the tipping point. But throughout this scene, take a look at her eyes in particular. After seeing the town's evisceration, her irises suddenly become smaller, and her eyes become seemingly larger in addition to their dead, expressionless look, following the awakening of Ion. From this point on, Mythra says less than a handful of words, and most of the emotion and downfall of her character is portrayed through her eyes and body language. I believe what sells her confliction exceptionally well is the oxymoronic juxtaposition of her reserved, almost lifeless appearance, and her volatile nature as defined by her erratic actions, like letting loose a blood-curdling scream, or releasing a volley of blasts that destroyed Malos and the Tornan Titan. The significance of the scene goes beyond the death of Milton to be a grave reminder to Mythra that she was unable to save innocence and stop her adversary despite her power and accumulated knowledge. Not to mention that the destruction of Torna was a result of her actions in retaliation to Malos. The entire ordeal created a toxic idea that burrowed into her mind and would control her for centuries. She is a burden on the world, and it would be better off without her.
This virulent way of thinking is cemented in Mythra during the later half of the cutscene where the survivors bear witness to the final moments of the Tornan Titan. Expression and eye contact is critical to the flow of visual storytelling in this sequence, as Mythra's face reveals a sense of pure dismay that hints to the turbulent storm of blazing horror within her, staring out over the railing with dying eyes at the consequences of her desperate moments of blind fury against Malos. Everything culminates once Mythra locks eyes with Mikhail, as her greatest fear, the death of innocence, is physically represented with Milton's lifeless body and Mikhail's response to her approach. Pulling Milton's corpse away from Mythra, this moment of direct eye contact with Mikhail is lost, and it's compounded by the fact that this is the final moment of eye contact from anyone in the entire sequence. Stumbling backwards, though her driver's there to physically support her, neither his eyes nor his heart make any form of true contact with her. Adam Origo in this moment is not capable of meeting her shattered gaze head-on, as he lacks the conviction to emotionally shoulder the weight of her burdens and her actions. Mythra is simply isolated from those around her, and their wordlessly unsupportive reactions, from Jin protectively holding Laura closer to him as if he's wary of the remaining Aegis' presence, to Adam not possessing even the conviction to turn her around to face him, is representative of the shift in public opinion towards the concept of the Aegis, as well as the revival of a searing wildfire of self-loathing made physical by the weight of this moment in the Golden Country.
Adam walking forward almost as if he plans to stop Mythra is still one of my favorite details in the entirety of Torna, and accentuates the thought that maybe Adam is lost in Angelus himself, another sentiment that could be witnessed in Mythra through her relationship. Yet Adam is still there to catch her, and with the scene's conclusion, we are given the birth of Pyra, a separate self that embodied both outward characteristics and personality traits that opposed her own, allowing Mythra to hide from the world.
Not only is Mythra hiding from the world with this action, but she is, in a space even closer to our heart, hiding from those who frequently surrounded her. Far from a journey filled with nothing but pleasantries, her time with the cast is marked by constant backlash against her attitude and criticism of her actions or lack of tangible empathy in certain instances. Mythra's refinement, like any Blades, is not limited to the will of her driver, but shaped by the people that generally associate with her more than any others do. Spend enough time close to a Blade, and anyone can begin to affect the way they incorporate collected information into their development of a more human psyche. For example, the decision for Pyra to possess a more compassionate demeanor is partially an emotional response to the criticism of her early inability to relate to the suffering of others, and the difficulty she has with positive relationships. These differences in personality are pushed upon Pyra as a way for Mythra to flee from the weight of her fears, and it shows in the way she relied upon the girls she constructed to shoulder the responsibility of acting opposite to who Mythra is. Such is the way she hopes to prevent such sentiments from appearing within those around her in the future.
Fast forwarding to the events of the base game, I conclude that this line perfectly describes the nature of their relationship and Mythra's predicament.
That's not fair.
It's not fair that Mythra's hand was forced to combat Malos, nor is it fair that Pyra bears the burden Mythra decided to hide from.
As surprising as it may be upon an initial realization, the battle between the Aegises at the end of Torna fundamentally impacted Malos in a very similar way. As I go over in my analysis featuring Malos, the 3 original members of the Trinity processor, Pneuma, Logos, and Ontos, are each built to exemplify a focus on one type of attribute, one perspective of the world. Malos, as Logos, represents purified logical reasoning, whereas Mythra, as Pneuma, represents purified emotional reasoning, with Ontos acting as the mediator between them, allowing the 3 to deliberate a course of action to take together. Despite this inherent difference in the way each would approach an issue, however, they are essentially identical otherwise, even though neither would ever admit such a thing, and it shows in how Malos gains the same deep insecurities that plague Mythra. Her counterpart was instead broken by the experience of what the results of having deep emotional connections could be, and how it spoke to a role more complicated than simply acting as the beings tasked with annihilating all of Allrest. What this ultimately demonstrates is that when either is addressing the other with their belief of what their role in the world is before the events of Chapter 7, neither is truly convinced of what they say in their hearts. Doubts stemming from how their previous conflict ended bends the true perspectives of both Mythra and Malos towards views that are more befitting of how the other is portrayed by their roles in the world. The situation in its totality is tremendously unfortunate, but it is the path that leads us to the core of the experience, Xenoblade Chronicles 2.
The first few chapters of Xenoblade Chronicles 2 are given to Pyra, and offer a better look at how she differs from the Mythra we are familiar with from Torna. Rex becomes our new protagonist and the driver of the Aegis, which offers an interesting comparison to Adam as they both have a happy-go-lucky attitude. The end of Chapter 3 marks a time of desperation, where Rex's life is in danger and Mythra is awakened. Usually this is the first time the player will be introduced to Mythra, and it's painted clearly that she is quite different from her sister. Her cold, serious demeanor is a stark contrast to Pyra's, and makes perfect sense when put into the perspective of Torna. Mythra's arrogance cost her the upper hand in her battle against Malos and Torna. So this encounter showcases another example of Mythra learning from past mistakes by remaining completely focused and dedicated to the friend in front of her. I think it's incredibly interesting to see how the 500 years have affected Mythra, and that's no more apparent than when she angrily yells at Rex on the following day.
Given the events of Torna's downfall, it's not surprising and very understandable that her first interaction with Rex in a less tense environment escalates quickly due to her unaltered broken perspective. Her immediate outburst would initially lead the player to believe that she's only capable of conveying anger, negative emotions, but we're shown that there is still a sympathetic side deep down when Rex acknowledges her beration with an admittance of the accuracy of her words. It's when he mentions that he was concerned for her well-being that she feels guilt creep into her. Looking back at the final cutscene before her transformation, Adam doesn't say a word to Mythra, and neither does any other member of the cast that is present. His embrace may have been his method of comforting her, but in such a state of confusion and self-loathing, it's only natural that she may have been closed off to those gestures or any words. In the deafening silence of those moments of rejection and uncertainty, Mythra felt like there was no place to run, no support for her from anyone. To finally hear this expression of genuine concern for her well-being, then, from someone who has only very recently become aware of her mere existence? Those words of hopelessly naive purity are like a jolt of shock that rocks her to her core after centuries of mulling over the implications of her experiences in the Golden Country.
This is why Torna is such a strong addition to the Xenoblade 2 universe, as it provides extra context for certain scenes that might not have been apparent from just playing the base game, and strengthening characters like Mythra. With Mythra reintroduced into the world, it leads to a split in screen time between her and Pyra, so she might appear less than in Torna. However, this problem is remedied by clarifying that Mythra and Pyra's experiences are linked, so it's not really an issue who is physically present. Similarly to the method in which Mythra could receive development from another character like Adam and Torna, Mythra is able to grow through the cast's interactions with Pyra. So when Pyra talks with Corin and Fonset Village about the suffering Rex has endured and how her present might only bring him more pain, I think it's fair to assume that those sentiments are shared by Mythra. The two are able to freely understand each other and communicate, a concept that careens into a dark promise at the cliffs of Moritha.
As the narrative progresses and the members of Torna capture Pyra on the Titan of Genbu, Rex and the group eventually set out with a newfound passion to rescue the Aegis from the iron grasp of Jin and Malos. Aside from Malos spamming his favorite word,
Boy.
the scene before the battle is the execution of Rex's second and most important reawakening, a mental victory. where he finally understands the foolishness of his actions, the misguided misinterpretation of Pyra and Mythra as merely being the same person, and how such arrogant beliefs have affected the two over the course of the game. This culminates in Rex declaring that he realizes what it means to be driver and blade, a realization that Mythra once learned during Torna, and one that had been drained from the despondent Jin after the events of the assault on the Tornan remnant. Only one thing is needed for that connection to be made, a look of thorough surprise on Jin's face, the look of a man encountering a perspective once believed to be lost to a more progressive point in Alrestian history. The subtle beauty of this moment is how Rex's understanding is created, and in turn paves the way for him to convince Jin and Mythra of this lesson later in the story.
At the center of the battle is the real meat of the chapter. The two parts to the scene that provided the key for the third sword were the receptiveness of Mythra and the vocalization of Rex. The young driver makes it abundantly clear that as a driver and blade, they are one in body and soul, and he doesn't care about the destination unless it's together. This connection is both literal due to the sharing of the Aegis' core crystal and figurative as Rex has only been able to grow because of the journey Pyra sent him on. Without them, he wouldn't have made it this far. And with the assurance that he won't let what happened 500 years ago happen again, Mythra's fears have finally been laid to rest in a magnificent scene of acceptance. Numa is born, and so is a new outlook on life. Along with a change in color and a redesign comes an outfit that serves as a fulfillment of Saito's quote on the missing parts. Numa has no prevalent fears, nothing to hold her back like Mythra and Pyra did. Numa, or the Spirit, is an entity that has transcended their previous negative qualities to become the being they truly are. And this, to me, is the culmination of their entire story. The biggest question is, why Rex? If Adam was unable to control and harness the true power of the Aegis, then how could some...
Little shit!
Yeah, let's go with that. The answer comes in the strength of their will and the connection to the Aegis. As mentioned previously, Adam held deep within him feelings of fear and inadequateness. He was courageous, had a heart of gold, and competent. But his resonance ultimately affected Mythra and likely was responsible for sending Mythra down a long, arduous path. Rex shares all the attributes that Adam had, but he had the benefit of growing alongside the Aegis and overcoming the difficulties that arose, such as his amateur skills as the driver or self-doubt. That last one in particular was thanks to the strong support system he surrounded himself with. Adam never really had that chance, as Mythra states in the Land of Morifa, she made a choice too. Adam might have wished the best for Mythra, but her own reservations kept that power at bay. Instead, Adam's work paved the way for Rex to help her through her inner torment, which finally happens at the cliffs of Morifa, where Rex's words stirred her into making that choice. There's still plenty more of the game in the Aegis, such as their continued relationship with Jin and Malos, as well as her meeting with Klaus. But this is what I consider the defining moment, and pseudo-ending to her arc. Much like Dunban's confrontation with Metalface, this is the moment the character's trials and tribulations have built towards, and the payoff is extraordinary. Mythra's a character that is truly deserving of all the love she gets. She brings levity with her snappy comebacks and cockiness, complexity with her internal struggles and growth as a blade, and crits for days because hot damn!
Mythra serves as an excellent example of how characters can be portrayed and developed in innovative ways. Her ties to Pyra, Rex, Malos, and Adam allow for development outside of her actual character, which splits the ability to build said character amongst a plethora of candidates.
The last and quite possibly strongest reason Mythra is heralded as an excellent character is because she exemplifies an issue that resides in our reality. There are times where someone might believe they are unable to live up to the self-conceived expectations of others, and that perhaps their actions are a burden to those very people. This perspective unfortunately lends itself to a toxic mindset, one that may force them to hide behind a makeshift facade or lose the motivation to partake in endeavors they once enjoyed. Sometimes it can be difficult to accept the help or words of comfort from loved ones, but having that strong support system and working with them will one day put those fears and reservations to rest. Coffee, milk, whichever one you prefer. Mythra is a character that drives the narrative of Torna and Xenoblade Chronicles 2, and that is why Mythra is such an amazing character. Hello there everybody, and welcome to the end of the video. I just want to say I'm very sorry that this video is coming later than my usual release time of Sundays at 2. There was a lot of work that went into this video, and I wanted to make sure that it was done just right before I put something out. So I want to say also thank you for being patient. On top of that, a big gracious thank you for watching the video, and I really hope you enjoyed. This video was a lot of fun to make. A lot of work, but definitely a lot of fun. I got to work with Rudra on this video, which was just a really great time. I sent him a message initially asking if he wanted to collab on this because I saw that he was tackling Mythra for his next character analysis, and coincidentally aligned with what I had planned for Mythra, and I was already kind of working on some notes, so I thought it would have been a great idea, and we had a lot of great conversations, and it's always a great time talking with him, so big thanks to Rudra. Thank you so much, dude. Also, please be sure to go check out his Twitter and his analyses. If you like the stuff that I do here on the channel, I'm sure you will love his write-ups. They're really great. If you like this video, I'd be very much appreciative if you left a like and subscribed. We actually just crossed the 800 subscriber threshold, and we're just getting closer and closer to my goal of 1,000 by the end of the year, and that's really thanks to you guys for all the support. Also, if something in the video clicked with you, or if you have a suggestion, please feel free to leave a comment down below. I love reading them, and I love talking with you guys down in the comments. I feel like it's just a great way to interact with more people that love Xenoblade, or whatever other game I'm covering. It's just a lot of fun. So the last thing before we close this off is, where exactly do we go from here? Well, I know that typically I like to stick to 2 Xenoblade videos followed by 1 miscellaneous game, but you're gonna have to forgive me. I'm gonna have to make an exception because Link's Awakening comes out on September 20th, one of my favorite games of all time, and I really wanted to do a video covering the original before it came out. So that's the plan for the next video, is to have a Link's Awakening themed video, and then we're back to Xenoblade. I'm sorry if that's not exactly what you were expecting, but don't worry, the Xenoblade videos coming after that are going to be great. I have some cool themes, especially when we get into Halloween. That's really all I have to say for today, so thank you guys, as always, and until next time.